Hey, what's going on YouTube? Welcome to another League of Legends guide. Today we're going to cover Jungle Sejuani.
Trust nothing but your strength.
Sejuani is a champion with pretty good mobility and tons of crowd control, which makes her a relatively good ganker. She then has some built-in tank stats and a decent jungle clear, so she'll be able to get through that jungle relatively quickly while still having a decent health pool, and then she can start ganking. Finally, she has pretty good objective control and a strong disengage. You don't ever want to clump up against a Sejuani because she's going to stun every single one of you. Now, one of the biggest downsides to her is the fact that she does have a relatively weak early game. The majority of champions out there can easily 1v1 Sejuani, and a lot of them are popular picks right now. Stuff like Lee Sin, Olaf, Nidalee, all that kind of crap that does excel in the early game. That of course means in the current meta, you may struggle. You are then pretty bad in 1v1s and 2v2s until you're level 6, but that does drastically change once you do get your ultimate. However, you are very reliant on that ultimate as well. It's very important to have in teamfights. But in short, as long as you can make it through that early game and not have the enemy jungler get too far ahead, you can be absolutely devastating in teamfights in the mid and late game. For my masteries, I like to go 6 Ferocity, 6 Cunning, and 18 Resolve, grabbing Strength of the Ages as the keystone mastery. Even when Strength of the Ages does get changed, I feel like it probably will still be the best pick on Sejuani since she does have so much crowd control. But anyways, I do like the 6 Ferocity, 6 Cunning split instead of 12 in either tree because you do get a lot more from it in my opinion. Expose weakness and the ability power is really strong at Sejuani, as is that movement speed and increased buff duration from monsters. For my runes, I like to go attack speed reds, armor yellows, a mix of scaling cooldown reduction and scaling magic resist blues, and ability power quint. Unless you're a Sejuani who always goes for a frozen heart or an iceborne gauntlet, then I would recommend taking these scaling cooldown reduction blues because getting CDR on her can be rather hard sometimes, and you do need it for your reduced ultimate. But other than that little bit of magic resist and armor is great to get at least a little tanky, and the attack speed and ability power are fantastic for clearing through the jungle. For your summoners, you don't really have any other option but to take Smite and Flash. Smite is a requirement on a jungler so you can actually make it through your jungle, and it will allow you to secure dragons and barons later on in the game. It's then also required to even buy your jungler item, so that's where you have no choice but to take this summoner. Flash is then definitely the second best summoner spell on Sejuani by a rather large margin. It's great when used to escape from an enemy, but it'll also allow you to pull off strong combos like a very long initiate by using Flash, then Arctic Assault, followed by a Glacial Prison. By far the best summoners, don't take anything else. Now let's look at those abilities, starting with our passive, Frost Armor. Damaging an enemy with an ability or basic attack grants Sejuani between 10 and 25 bonus armor and between 10 and 25% slow resistance for 2 seconds, increased by an additional 2 seconds per instance of damage up to a maximum of 6 seconds, with further damage refreshing the duration. So as long as you're attacking, you get bonus armor and slow resistance, which is pretty fantastic. This does also scale as you move through the game, so it becomes a better and better passive. Now let's take a look at that Q, Arctic Assault. Sejuani charges forward, knocking up all enemies she charges through and dealing them magic damage. This ability stops after colliding with an enemy champion, but can affect multiple enemy champions if they are close enough together. So first of all, it is a very short duration CC as it is just a, quick knock up, but it can combo really well with stuff like Yasuo, who can then use their ultimate. It's then also a great gap closer. It's a great way to get onto an enemy team so you can follow up with your damage and your slows. And then, of course, if you are getting invaded by one of those champions you are weak against early on, you can hop over walls. It's a fantastic ability, and we only really need 1 point in it. We do max our others. Now, let's look at that W ability, Flail of the Northern Winds. On first cast, Sejuani's next basic attack deals bonus magic damage to the target and nearby enemies, capped at 300 against minions and monsters. After you land this empowered auto attack, or upon reactivation, Sejuani rotates her flail around for the next 4 seconds, dealing magic damage every second to nearby enemies. This does also reset your auto attack timer, so you can auto attack, use this auto attack for a very quick combo. So this ability is what we max first because it does of course do AoE damage since it does swing around, and it also does do percentage of maximum health damage, so we can actually deal some relatively good damage to tanky targets. Well, let's look at that last basic ability, your E, Permafrost. For your passive, Sejuani's abilities and basic attacks apply frost to enemies for 4 seconds. When activated, Sejuani consumes Frost on all nearby enemies to deal them magic damage and slow them by 1.5 seconds, and this is up to a 70% slow. So yeah, here is yet again some more CC in Sejuani's kit. Both your Q and W do AoE damage, so if you can hit multiple targets, you can activate this and slow potentially an entire team by 70%. Since the cooldown does go down 1 second every rank as well, we do max this 1 second right behind our W. But now, finally, your ultimate, Glacial Prison. Sejuani throws a Frostforge Bola in a line, shattering at maximum range or upon champion collision, dealing magic damage to all enemies in the shatter area. If the Bola shatters with an enemy champion, it will stun the target and nearby enemies for a short duration. If the Bola reaches its max range, however, it will slow enemies instead by 30%. So with all that CC we already have, here's some more, and it's even better. This one even has a 1175 range, so you could stun targets from a pretty long distance and then charge in with your Q and apply a slow with your E. It's pretty crazy how much CC Sejuani actually has in her kit, and I'm going to deem her right now the Queen of CC. For our skill order, we want to focus on maxing our ultimate first at 6, 11, and 16. We then want to follow up with our W, since it does do some really nice AoE damage and even percentage of target's maximum health. Then we move on to our E as the cooldown goes down and the slow percentage does go up as well, and then finally we do max our Q last. We only need 1 early point so we can use it as a gap closer or an escape tool. For your jungle route, you can pretty much do whatever you want on Sejuani. She does have a pretty good clear, but this is what I usually do. When I'm on red side, I'll smite Krugs, kill Razorbeaks, and then smite my red buff to get some health back, then do Wolves, smite blue, and kill Grump. At this point, you can either look to gank, or of course you could back and just buy. When I'm on blue buff side, I like to kill Grump. I use my smite of course, then do blue buff and kill Wolves with my smite yet again. At this point, I like to go back and buy, and then do my Razorbeaks, smite red, and then kill Krugs. The reason I like to back here somewhat early is because I will be back with my red buff for a longer duration, and I can get off more ganks with that red buff, as they will be more effective, because her ganks are kind of mediocre until you are level 6. Your ganks are always pretty decent, but they do get a lot better when you are level 6. You don't have a ton of damage, but you do bring a knockup from your Arctic Assault, max health damage from your Flail of the Northern Winds, strong slows from your Permafrost, and a really strong range stun from your Glacial Prison. When you're coming in for a gank, you can either use your Glacial Prison to stun from a distance or get on top of the enemy with that Arctic Assault. If the enemy then tries to escape from you, you can use the ability that you didn't use before to get back onto the enemy. Use the strong slow from your Permafrost to stay on top of them and deal some extra damage with Flail of the Northern Wind. In team fights, you're pretty much just a frontliner that peels for your carries that can also initiate a fight. Try your best to keep the enemy tanks and carries up front so your carries are safe in the backline and can work on getting through those targets. Whenever you see a good opportunity to stun multiple targets with your Glacial Prison, then take it. You'll then want to keep as many enemies slowed as possible with your Permafrost, so if anybody does break through the front line, your carries will have a much easier time kiting. Lastly, if those targets do then need some extra peeling, you can also knock them up with your Arctic Assault. Now we're going to look at some of her hard matchups, and for anybody that did watch my Shyvana guide, these are going to look very similar because she's weak against the same things, really strong early game. First up is Nidalee, and although she did get nerfed rather recently, she's still super strong and is pretty much the queen of the early game. Her clear is basically just as good as yours, and she brings better ganks to the table, at least in the early game anyways. When you are 6, of course yours are much better. You are a much better team fighter as well, but of course you have to get to that point in the game. Olaf is another strong early game jungler who will put a lot of pressure on your team while you try to rush to 6. Now his ganks aren't as fast as Nidalee's though, so you can look for opportunities to counter gank him. You're better in the late game, so try to make it there. Elise is then another strong early game jungler that you can't fight until later on in the game. She is somewhat weak against your counter ganks though, so look for opportunities to flank her when she goes in for a gank, and you want to farm as much as you can and make it to the late game. Now we kick off our second page with Rek'Sai. And she's pretty much just like the other 3 matchups. She has a very good early game and will pressure your team a lot while you try to become a threat. She's then also very hard to counter gank because her Void Rush can go to a lane that she knows you're far away from, but at least you do win that late game as long as you can get off some really good stuns. Now there's Evelynn, and she's got very good early ganks as well, and she can take control of the game while you work on becoming a threat. She is rather weak in early 1v1s, but then again, so are you. In teamfights though, you do have the potential to be a much bigger threat if you can stun multiple targets. Try to keep track of her as well with a vision ward. Now Jax is hard as well, but for a different reason. His early game isn't that crazy, but his late game is even better than yours, at least damage wise. In the late game, you may need to focus on peeling him off your team. If he does jump onto your team and gets off a really good stun, that can be enough to win the team fight. Now let's finish off this guide with our item build, which starts with a Hunter's Talisman, Health Potion, and Warding Totem. For your core build, we have two different options. We have the Bruiser core that takes the Runic Echoes, Sunfire Cape, and Abyssal Scepter, or we have the full tank core that goes for Cinder Hulk, Dead Man's Plate, and Spirit Visage. If you're on an incredibly tanky team and you need some extra damage, go for the Bruiser core, and if you really need a good frontline tank, then go for the full tank core. We have a lot of good boot options as well. My favorites are Merc Treads if you are against high CC, or Ninja Tabis if you're against high AD. Boots of Swiftness and Boots of Mobility also are great picks as well if you are looking for quicker ganks, and Ionian Boots are great for extra 10% CDR to reduce the cooldown on your abilities. For our item pool, we have multiple ways of adding some extra damage. We have the Liandry, so we're against a very tanky team when we need that burn, Rylai's to keep stuff permaslowed, Iceborne Gauntlet kinda for the same but also some nice CDR, and Hextech Brotobelt is pretty good as well. It can add some nice bursts. Of course, it also does have some nice health and CDR. Now, for some armor options, we of course have the Randuins if we want to reduce some crit and have a nice AoE slow. Frozen Heart's a great way to get 20% CDR yet again and reduce auto attacks. And Thornmail is great against high AD teams to return some of that damage. For our magic resist options, we could go for a Locket if our support didn't grab one. It is a great shield. We then have Banshee's Veil for stopping spells. If we, however, want a mix of both, we could go for the Guardian Angel so we can come back to life in that late game, or the Zizirot Portal if we do want to add some split push as well. Warmogs is then a great way to just get a really high health pool and get some regeneration, and Righteous Glory is great for chasing enemies and engaging since you do get a movement speed increase. It's a pretty damn overlooked item. So for our Bruiser full build, we take our core, then add a Liandry's to increase our ability power and apply a burn, and then finish it off with a Randuin so we do get a higher health pool and some much needed armor. You will deal a pretty decent amount of damage with this Bruiser full build, yet you'll be pretty tanky at the same time. If you want to be incredibly hard to bring down though, you'll take your tanky core, then add a Warmogs and a Randuin's yet again. Your job with this build is basically to sit on the front line, soak damage all day while your carries kill people, and apply your ridiculous amount of crowd control. Sejuani itemizes really well, so pick whatever you need based on the situation you're in. As I'm sure you've noticed, there's a big lack of CDR in these builds, which is why we took those runes, but of course you can pick up that Iceborne Gauntlet in a Bruiser build, or the Frozen Heart in a tank build, to get a nice amount of CDR if you do really prefer having that. Of course, there's also Ionian Boots. But that covers everything I've got on Jungle Sejuani. I'd like to thank you guys for watching the guide, and if you guys did enjoy, you could always like, and if you're new here, you could also subscribe. We also do Riot Point giveaways on our Twitter at egaming_TV, and there's actually one going on right now that ends on October 31st, so if you're interested in those, head over there and give us a follow. But anyways, thank you guys a ton again for watching the guide, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace!